Everything you learned about the world's tallest mountain is wrong. Not slightly off. Fundamentally, measurably wrong. And once you see it, you cannot unsee it. For over a century, we have been ranking mountains by a single number. How far their peak sits above sea level. It sounds logical. Sea level is a fixed reference point, right? But here's the problem. Sea level has nothing to do with how big a mountain actually is. It only tells you where the mountain happens to break through the water's surface, or the imaginary line where water would be if there were any. Judge a skyscraper by how many floors sit above the third floor, and you get equally meaningless results. Mount Everest rises 8,849 meters above sea level. That number is drilled into every geography textbook on the planet, and it earns Everest the title of highest point on Earth. That part is true, but highest is not the same as tallest, and the difference is where things get genuinely staggering. Sitting in the middle of the Pacific Ocean is Mauna Kea, a shield volcano on the Big Island of Hawaii. From the surface of the ocean, it looks modest, roughly 4,200 meters of rocky summit poking into the sky. Tourists drive up it to watch sunsets above the clouds. It does not feel like a record breaker. But Mauna Kea does not start at sea level. Its base sits on the floor of the Pacific, nearly 6,000 meters beneath the waves. Measure the mountain from its true foundation to its highest point, and you get approximately 10,210 meters, more than a full kilometer taller than Everest, base to peak. Most of this mountain is invisible, hidden under an ocean's weight of water, unseen, uncelebrated, silently dwarfing the peak we put on postcards. And Mauna Kea is not even the final challenge to Everest's throne. There is a third way to measure mountains, distance from the center of the Earth. Because our planet bulges at the equator, a mountain sitting near the equatorial belt gets a free boost. Ecuador's Mount Chimborazo reaches only 6,263 meters above sea level, barely making the list of the 100 tallest peaks. But its summit sits about 6,384 kilometers from Earth's core. Everest's summit? Roughly 2 kilometers closer to the center of the planet. The mountain closest to the stars has never been the one we put on the map. Most people picture mountains the way they'd picture a boulder, ancient, fixed, indifferent to time. That instinct is completely wrong, and the reality is far stranger. Mountains are moving right now. Not in any way you'd notice on a human timescale, but the rock beneath your feet on any major range is being driven upward by forces so powerful they buckle entire continental plates like sheets of aluminum foil. The Himalayas, home to every peak above 8,000 meters, are still rising at roughly 5 millimeters per year. That's because the Indian tectonic plate hasn't stopped colliding with the Eurasian plate, a slow-motion crash that began about 50 million years ago and shows no signs of stopping. Mount Everest itself gains somewhere between 4 and 5 millimeters of height annually from that ongoing collision. The Alps are pushing upward too, at around 1 to 2 millimeters per year. Even the Appalachians, which most geologists call ancient and worn, are experiencing a kind of rebound. As glacial ice that once pressed them down has melted away, the crust is slowly springing back. But here's where it gets genuinely wild. At the same time the Earth is building these mountains up, wind, water, ice, and gravity are tearing them apart. Glaciers grind rock into fine powder called glacial flour. Rainwater seeps into cracks, freezes, expands, and splits boulders apart over thousands of winters. Rivers carry millions of tons of sediment off mountain flanks every single year and deposit it into valleys, plains, and eventually the sea. This isn't destruction, it's a balance. In a young, actively rising range like the Himalayas, uplift outpaces erosion, so the peaks climb higher. In an older range, erosion wins, and the mountains slowly flatten. The Appalachians were once as tall as the Himalayas. That's not a metaphor. They genuinely rivaled Everest in height, over 480 million years ago, before millions of years of rain and ice reduced them to the gentle, forested ridges they are today. So, a mountain range isn't a monument. It's a contest between the interior heat of the planet pushing matter upward and the surface forces methodically dragging it back down. Right now, that contest is happening on every range on Earth. measurable with GPS instruments sensitive enough to detect millimeter-scale movement from space. The mountains are alive. They just move on a clock nothing like ours. (2,100 meters). That is how much farther from the center of the Earth the summit of a mountain you have probably never stood on is compared to Everest. And the numbers do not lie. Mount Everest tops out at 8,849 meters above sea level. That figure is carved into textbooks, tattooed on gear bags, and repeated so often it feels like a law of physics. But sea level is not the center of the Earth. And here is where everything you thought you knew gets quietly dismantled. Earth is not a perfect sphere. It spins, and that spin throws mass outward at the equator the way a wet dog shakes water off its sides. The result is a planet that bulges. The equatorial diameter of Earth is about 43 kilometers wider than the polar diameter. 43 kilometers. That is not a rounding error. That is a significant deformation of an entire planet. Now place a mountain near that bulge. Chimborazo sits in Ecuador, just 1.5 degrees south of the equator. It stands 6,263 meters above sea level, which sounds almost modest compared to Everest. On a standard altitude ranking, Chimborazo does not even crack the top 30 highest peaks on Earth. It would be passed over on any reasonable list. But measure from the center of the Earth outward, and the math flips entirely. Because Chimborazo sits so close to the equatorial bulge, the ground it rises from is already dramatically farther from Earth's core than the ground Everest rises from in the Himalayas. Everest is at roughly 28 degrees north latitude, well away from that swollen equatorial band. When you stack Chimborazo's elevation on top of that already elevated baseline, its summit reaches approximately 6,384 kilometers from Earth's center. Everest's summit measures around 6,382 kilometers from the same point. Chimborazo wins by over 2 kilometers. Oh, what is Everest, really? It is the highest point above sea level. It is the most oxygen-deprived, the most brutal, the most storied climb on the planet. No one is taking that away. But if an alien spacecraft were parked at Earth's center and you wanted to poke the closest finger out into space, that finger would not scratch Everest. It would scratch the ice-covered volcano in Ecuador that most people have never heard of. The mountain closest to the stars is not the tallest mountain. It is the one standing on the biggest foundation. Most people assume the biggest threat on the world's highest peaks is the cold. It is not. Strip away the ice, the storms, the crevasses, and what kills most climbers above 8,000 meters is something you cannot see, feel, or fight off: the simple disappearance of oxygen. Above that altitude, a line exists with a name that should tell you everything: the death zone. At 8,000 meters, the air pressure has dropped so severely that each breath delivers only about a third of the oxygen you would get at sea level. Your lungs are working. Your red blood cells are trying. But the math is brutal. You are simply not getting enough. The body responds immediately and badly. Heart rate surges trying to compensate. Red blood cell production kicks into overdrive, which sounds useful until you realize it thickens your blood, turning it into something closer to sludge and raising the risk of fatal clots. The capillaries in your brain begin leaking fluid, swelling the tissue inside your skull, a condition called high-altitude cerebral edema. Your lungs can fill with fluid too, a separate death sentence called pulmonary edema, and then the mind goes. Climbers above 8,000 meters report full conversations with people who are not there. They see cities on the horizon. They feel an overwhelming certainty that a warm, safe room exists just around the next ridge. In 1996, during the deadliest season in Everest history, multiple survivors described making decisions that felt completely rational in the moment and were obviously fatal in retrospect. Oxygen deprivation does not feel like confusion. It feels like clarity at the cellular level. the body has begun consuming itself. With insufficient oxygen to sustain normal metabolism, muscle tissue breaks down. The brain prioritizes survival above everything else, pulling energy from wherever it can find it. Even with supplemental oxygen tanks, elite climbers spending more than 16 to 20 hours in the death zone risk permanent neurological damage. No amount of training or acclimatization changes this ceiling. Below 8,000 meters, the body can adapt over weeks. Above it, there is no adapting. Only a race against time before the systems that keep you alive begin shutting down, one by one, in the most hostile environment a human being can voluntarily enter. Picture a mountain range so vast it would take you 2.5 years to drive its length without stopping. Peaks rise 2 kilometers from the seafloor. Volcanic eruptions crack open the earth in slow motion. Creatures cluster around chimneys of superheated water, surviving in conditions that would kill almost anything we know. And not a single ray of sunlight has ever touched any of it. This is not some distant planet. It is directly beneath our oceans, and almost nobody talks about it. The mid-ocean ridge is a continuous underwater mountain range that winds through every major ocean on Earth, from the Arctic to the Atlantic, through the Indian Ocean, across the Pacific. End to end, it stretches roughly 65,000 kilometers. That is more than 1.5 times the circumference of the planet. If you laid every major mountain range on land side by side, the Himalayas, the Andes, the Rockies, the Alps, their combined length would not come close. And yet, most people cannot name it. The ridge forms where tectonic plates pull apart, forcing magma up from the mantle below. In some places, the seafloor spreads several centimeters every year, slow by human standards, but geologically violent. Where that new crust cracks, hydrothermal vents open up, chimneys that blast water heated to over 400 degrees Celsius into the near-freezing deep. The pressure down there stops the water from boiling. Instead, it surges out black and mineral-rich, building towering structures called black smokers, some growing several stories tall. Around those vents, life found a way that had no business existing. Giant tube worms up to 2 meters long anchor themselves to the rock and harvest energy from chemical reactions rather than sunlight, a process called chemosynthesis. Ghostly shrimp cluster by the thousands around scalding vents, their eyes adapted to detect the faint infrared glow. Yeti crabs wave bacteria-covered claws through the water to feed. None of it needs the sun. None of it was expected. Before the 1970s, scientists assumed the deep ocean floor was essentially barren. The discovery of hydrothermal vent communities in 1977 rewrote our understanding of where life can exist, and quietly raised new questions about what might be living in the oceans of distant moons. The tallest mountain on Earth may be Everest, but the longest, most geologically active, most biologically surprising mountain range? It has been hiding beneath the waves the entire time. Most people, if you ask them to picture the Appalachians, see gentle, forested ridges, friendly mountains, ancient and well-worn. And that last part is exactly right. What most people get wrong is the scale of what those mountains have lost. The Appalachians have been standing since roughly 480 million years ago, which makes them among the oldest mountain chains still visible on Earth. But the mountains you can hike today are not the originals. They are the battered remnants of something that would have stopped you cold. When the ancient ocean called the Iapetus closed, continents grinding together in slow motion thrust rocks skyward in an event geologists call the tectonic orogeny. The mountains that rose were nothing like the gentle ridges of today. They were rivals to the Himalayas, peaks that likely reached 6,000 meters or higher, draped in glaciers, carved by rivers that no longer exist, soaring over a landscape utterly unrecognizable to modern eyes. Then the rain and the wind and the rivers got to work. And they had time, roughly 300 million years of it. Erosion is patient in a way the human mind genuinely struggles to hold. A mountain shedding just 1 millimeter of height per year disappears entirely in a million years. Scale that patience across geological time, and an entire Himalayan scale range is flattened into a low, rolling ridge. Which is exactly what happened here. Mount Mitchell, the highest point in the eastern United States today, stands at just over 2,000 meters. It is the stump of something that once would have made it look like a foothill, and the Appalachians are not alone. Beneath the flat plains of central Canada lies the eroded core of the Trans-Hudson orogeny, mountains that rose nearly 2 billion years ago, now so completely ground down that only their roots survive, exposed as ancient rock across the Canadian Shield. In Scandinavia, the Caledonides once formed a continuous chain with those very same Appalachians before the Atlantic Ocean cracked the world apart. Both ranges, Himalayan in scale during their prime, now barely break 1,000 meters. What we call permanent geography is only permanent on a human timescale. Given another 300 million years, the Himalayas will look exactly like the Appalachians do now, low, quiet, and barely recognizable as the giants they once were. One millimeter of rain per year. In some corners of Chile's Atacama Desert, that is the annual total, less moisture than you would find on a single morning of dew. Yet just 200 kilometers east, on the other side of the Andes, the Amazon basin drowns in more than 3,000 millimeters of rainfall every single year. Same latitude, same hemisphere, same planet, completely different worlds. The mountains did that. Here's how. When warm, moisture-laden air sweeps inland from the ocean and collides with a mountain range, it has nowhere to go but up. As it climbs, the air cools at a predictable rate, roughly 6.5 degrees Celsius for every 1,000 meters of altitude. Cooler air holds less water vapor, so that moisture condenses, clouds form, and rain falls, almost entirely on the windward side. This process is called orographic lift, and it is one of the most powerful climate-shaping forces on Earth. The other side of the mountain tells a very different story. That same air, now wrung dry, descends. As it drops back towards sea level, it warms again and expands. But there is almost no moisture left to release, so the land below stays parched. This is the rain shadow effect, and it is precisely why some of the world's driest places sit directly alongside its tallest peaks. You see this pattern everywhere. The Sierra Nevada wrings moisture from Pacific air, leaving Nevada, which means snow-covered in Spanish, a quiet irony for anyone who has driven through its baked interior, in near-permanent drought. The Himalayas operate at a truly continental scale. They block cold Arctic air from plunging south into India during winter, while in summer they force warm monsoon winds upward with such intensity that Cherrapunji, in northeastern India, receives over 11,000 millimeters of rain in a single year, one of the highest totals ever recorded anywhere on Earth. The Tibetan Plateau, on the leeward side, roughly 300 millimeters. A fraction. Mountains do not just sit there looking dramatic. They redirect rivers of air thousands of meters above the ground. They decide where forests grow dense and where nothing grows at all. They have been quietly writing the climate rules for entire continents for millions of years, long before anyone was around to read them. You're standing at the base of a wall of rock so vast you can't see the top, not because of clouds, but because the mountain curves away with the planet itself. The slope stretches nearly 600 kilometers in every direction. You'd need 2 full days just to drive across its base. And you're not on Earth. Olympus Mons on Mars is the largest volcano in the solar system, rising about 22 kilometers above the surrounding plains, nearly 3 times the height of Everest. But here's the thing that breaks your brain. If you stood on its summit, you wouldn't know you were on a mountain. The slope is so gradual, barely a few degrees, that the horizon would look perfectly flat. Mars has no tectonic plates dragging crust back down into the mantle, so its volcanoes just keep piling up, layer after layer, for billions of years. Earth's mountains wear down. Mars's just grow, but Mars is still rocky, still familiar. Travel further out, and mountains stop being rock at all. On Pluto. Yes, Pluto. NASA's New Horizons probe photographed mountain ranges in 2015 that stunned every geologist watching. Peaks rising 3,500 meters high, roughly the scale of the Rockies. Only they're made of water ice. Not snow sitting on top of rock, pure frozen water, rigid as granite in Pluto's minus 230-degree cold, strong enough to hold its own weight against gravity. No volcanoes built them. Scientists think tectonic-like shifting in Pluto's icy crust pushed them upward. A dwarf planet, billions of kilometers from the sun, running its own mountain-building process. Nobody expected that. And then there's Ceres, the largest object in the asteroid belt. In 2015, the Dawn spacecraft spotted a 4-kilometer-tall pyramid rising alone from flat terrain. Not a range, a single isolated peak, gleaming with bright salt deposits that reflect sunlight like a distant beacon. Scientists now believe it formed from ice pushing upward from below, a cryovolcanic mound built not by fire, but by slush. So what even is a mountain? After everything, the ice spires, the submerged ranges, the peaks that drift, and the ones built by slush on worlds we barely understand, the answer turns out to be beautifully simple. Wherever there's gravity and material and time, something will always find a way to push upward. If that kind of thing keeps you up at night the way it does me, hit subscribe. There's a lot more where this came from.